Well, for more on China's biodiversity, we're joined by Peter Lee. He's an associate professor of East Asian politics at the University of Houston downtown. Good to have you on the show.
Good to be here. Thank you.
All right, so let's look at this white paper on biodiversity. There was an acknowledgement that decades of breakneck industrialization in China have affected the ecosystem. So now we've got mechanisms put in place to reverse declines. How would you rate the progress so far?
You know, I would say that the white paper on biodiversity conservation is the most authoritative presentation by the Chinese government on its biodiversity conservation policy and strategies and accomplishments. I would say that the white paper, is for the general audience, but also specifically for the critics from around the world. In terms of the accomplishments, I have to admit that China has, in the past 10 years, implemented a new strategy, like, for example, piloting the national park mechanism, and it's implementing the so-called red line ecological protection mechanism, so that endangered species could be better protected. But there is still a lot more to be done.
And Peter, apart from its own successes so far, China is also trying to persuade nations to commit to a protection of about 30% of their territory by 2030. How ambitious is this target, 30% of all their land area?
You know, if you look at China's nature reserve, just started in the early 1950s, it covers today about 18% of China's territory, and the rest of the protected areas and the areas that's to be included in the so-called red line zones will amount to about 28%. So I would say 30% is really not that a big challenge, as long as the government in China and for other countries, if they can beef up their efforts. So that shouldn't be issues. But what is most important is that you have the plan, like China has the conservation plan in the 5-year plan. It is important you have the enforcement. And China today, law enforcement and a complete, comprehensive legal framework is still yet to be accomplished. So law enforcement and the balancing of commercial interest with the interest of ecological conservation is very important. So if those aspects or efforts can be accomplished, I don't think that 30% of the territory to be used for conservation purposes is too big a challenge.
But what about other developing countries, though? Can they financially afford that? And is there help for them?
That's a great question to say. But if we look at China's experience, China has developed breathtakingly in the last 4 decades. Now, China only until very recently realized the importance that China is an important player in global biodiversity conservation, because of China's efforts either way can have a great impact on global conservation. So the rest of the world can learn from China. So while developing the country's economy, conservation can never be put on the back seat.
Peter Lee from the University of Houston downtown, thank you so much for your time and insight.
Good to be here.